Those speakers include John Hockersmith from the University of Illinois, Andrea Pellegrini, also from the University of Illinois, Mary Beth Unsworth from Peer Transfer, and Tom Torrentor from ERS. Before we get started, I have a few items regarding today's format, starting with audio or video issues. If you're experiencing any problems, please contact the GoToWebinar support, and they'll be able to assist you with any problems that you're having. Additionally, if you have a question at any point in time for one of the presenters, please use the question box to submit it, and one of our facilitators will present the question to the presenter either during or at the end of the presentation. I also want to take a brief moment to mention that today marks the first webinar in our four-part webinar series for the year. This is the second year of providing the webinars. We'll keep everyone posted to the next webinar topic, which is number 2, and then the date when it's finalized. With that being said, I'd like to turn this over to Denny DeSantis, formerly from the University of Pittsburgh, and to Mr. David Glazerman from Temple University. Gentlemen, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Steve, and welcome, everyone. I'm Denny DeSantis, as Steve said, formerly from the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm joined with my co-host, David Glazerman, the Bursar and Assistant Vice President from Temple University, and we're here together virtually. So, well, David, I really am very excited about this webinar. We both have attended and participated in many webinars over the years, but today's webinar is of special interest to me. Because throughout all my years at the University of Pittsburgh, we interacted with thousands of international students, primarily related to their financial accounts. The University of Pittsburgh today enrolls over 2,700 international students. So I really can't wait to hear from our expert panelists today. So David, what's your experience been at Temple University?
Well, Denny, thank you, and again, welcome to everybody. Our experience at Temple is as international student enrollments continue to grow, the complexities are really jumping out at us more and more. We found in many years back we were having collection problems trying to recover monies from international students. We were incurring multiple semester debt from international students, and then find that these individuals have gone back to their home countries, and once that happens, it's a very difficult account to try and collect. Likewise, at the front end, we find a lot of issues getting monies from foreign countries into the United States, into our banking system, and just a lot of effort and a lot of manual effort at times to try and have payments handled. We found a solution that you're going to hear about today that we believe has worked very well for us. In working with our International Services Office, they're extremely pleased with the concept. It simplifies processes for students when they're first coming into a different environment, as you're going to hear. And then we're going to hear a little bit about how difficult it is and some of the tips and techniques to try and collect from international students. So with that, as we begin the first of the webinars this year, and ERS's 25th year of operation, happy anniversary, ERS. I want to turn the program, if we can flip over 2 slides, I'm going to turn the program over to John Hockersmith, and John's going to talk a little bit about his experiences at the University of Illinois. So John, it's yours.
Thank you, David and Denny, and welcome everyone. My role here is to talk about some of the problems that the University of Illinois has faced getting international student payments. We too, like Temple and University of Pittsburgh, have a substantial number of international students. In fact, the joke on our Chicago campus, University of Illinois Chicago, or UIC, is that what UIC really stands for is the University of India in China. But joking aside, the issues that students have faced when they try to send their payments, especially incoming freshman students, they wire us money from their local bank, and they are charged rather pretty significant exchange rates to get the funds out of their currency into U.S. dollars. They go to their local bank. Their local bank, is they're wire transferring the money, it may go to an international bank in their country. It may hit another bank in New York or on the West Coast in this country before it hits our bank. And so there were frequently multiple and costly bank fees. Up to 4 fees, I think, is the most that we saw, and frequently they were $40 a crack. So the payments would arrive between $40 and $160 short. There were also payment delays because the amount of information that can be provided on a wire transfer is very limited. And so the money would arrive at the university, but we couldn't figure out where it would go. And so the students would see late payment charges frequently, and if the payment was really delayed getting applied, then there were even registration holds that they experienced. That resulted in the time and inconvenience that they had to spend contacting their bank to find out what happened to the payment, and so on. Next slide, please. On our side, the university, the problem that we experienced, the real headache for us was identifying payments. We, again, would get these wire transfers in with very little identifying information, and as many of you know who work with international students in certain countries, a last name is very frequently used, and so trying to identify which Patel or which Kim would just virtually be impossible sometimes. So then that resulted in us having to contact the bank for additional information about the payer and the payee. And when the bank wasn't able to give us information, then we frequently had to return, or at least not frequently, but sometimes. We always hate to return money, so we didn't do it unless it was an absolute last resort, but returning unidentifiable payments. The customer service implications are obvious. The students would call and complain saying they had sent a payment, where's my payment? We would have to reverse late charges and registration holds. And in the case of those payments where we had to return them, we would have to request them to send a new payment with appropriate identifying information. They also needed to send another payment to make up for the fees, the bank fees that had been deducted. Next slide, please. So our solution was to contract with Peer Transfer. And one of our panelists is here from Peer Transfer, so I won't go into of how that company was founded, but it's been a very positive solution all the way around, both for our students and for the university. From the students' perspective, they experience much lower exchange rates, significantly lower than the commercial exchange rates that their bank was charging them. There were no bank fees. It's a specific, Peer Transfer uses a specific a university-specific portal. So it's virtually seamless for the student. It's easy for the student to track the status of their payment when they log into the portal to see where it's at, whether it's been applied or not. And then it results in the elimination of the delays that they had incurred previously. Next slide, please. From the university side, first and foremost, it's just a very easy contract. It's a no-cost contract with Peer Transfer. There are no charges to either the student or the university. so we didn't have to go through our purchasing department to do an RFP and go through the whole contract process. That was very easy. From a time perspective, it completely eliminates the identification issue, because one of the requirements of peer transfer is that the student has to include their university ID number. So we automatically know where the payments are, who they're designated for. Peer transfer also worked with our payment vendor, which is Nelnet, to have the payments just automatically be applied into Banner. We're a Banner school, so it's just automatically applied to the student's account in Banner. We don't even have to log into the dashboard, to the peer transfer dashboard, and manually apply the payments. It protects the privacy of our university banking information. Previously, we had to give our banking information to students or their families to give to their banks to know where to send the money. We don't have to do that anymore. Peer transfer also gives us functionality outside just the student portal. That we have a third-party billing portal. Many of our sponsors are international sponsors, and so Peer Transfer created a third-party billing portal for our international sponsors to make payments. We have general accounts or non-student receivables, and Peer Transfer created a separate portal for those. And then we've got some departments on campus who deal with international students or customers for payments that are not student tuition related, and we've been able to create separate portals for them. Next slide, please. At this time, I would like to turn you over to Andrea Pellegrini to talk about some of the barriers to money management we've experienced on the University of Illinois campus.
Thank you, John. So in order to give you a little bit more comprehensive perspective about what a student may have gone through beyond making a payment to the university, I'm going to share what we know about the financial obstacles that international students have to navigate, at least from our experience here at Illinois. From before they leave their home country, there's a lot of uncertainty about navigating the U.S. financial system that, you know, many Americans either take for granted or don't completely understand ourselves. So you can imagine how some international students are already at a disadvantage when it comes to money management. So I've organized the financial obstacles that we're going to go over into 3 different categories. So obviously before arriving on campus, after arriving on campus, and the daily decision making that obviously has to occur once they're on campus. Next slide. So before arriving on campus, students have to prove that they can pay for at least 1 year of study in order to obtain a student visa. We have heard some rumors that in some countries, families or entire communities will pool their money into one bank account to prove financial capability for that 1 year. But then once the student arrives on campus, the monies are pulled out and the student is forced to seek additional funding elsewhere. I don't know how prevalent that is, but that's just one obstacle that some students may have to face once they are on campus. Many students also don't have access to the same types of financial resources that many domestic students do. For instance, U of I does not have any traditional institutional loans specifically for international students, so that's something that is not available to them. And although we get asked about student loans frequently in my office, which is the Student Money Management Center, we have little to no information on international loans available to students, because we would literally have to know about institutional or international loans at hundreds of countries. So scholarships are also hard to come by for many international students, particularly with how competitive those can be. One thing that was surprising to us when we reached out to international students last year to do some program development research was how many students don't research the basic costs of living before they arrive on campus. So as a result, we have made some cost of living calculators available on our website so students can look up those costs for all 3 of our campuses, Chicago, Urbana-Champaign, or Springfield, before ever coming to the U.S. And we also mention it frequently during our summer webinars, which international students take part in more so than domestic students. Next slide. So some of our students may have difficulties early on adjusting to the responsibility of managing money on their own for the first time, just like we see with domestic students. These students are here on their own, and they're often managing monies and bank accounts and credit cards that previously their parents or some other person would have managed for them. So, and this is made even worse by the fact that students, international students, are navigating a foreign economy. So they may have no one to explain the foreign economy to them, and if they don't, then obviously they're at an even higher disadvantage. There are multiple reasons that a student can lose income unexpectedly. So obviously a parent losing a job, loss of scholarship or fellowship, or even employment. But as an international student, regardless of the reasons for losing income, it can take, from what I understand, up to 3 months just for a financial hardship application to be approved by the U.S. federal government. And those financial hardship applications are for students to seek employment off campus. But that means after it's been approved, they also have to apply for those jobs and find a job, and then they're only allowed to work 20 hours a week off campus. So if they are that much in the hole and they've already had to be in a financial crisis to apply, then they may never catch up even getting that 20-hour-a-week job. So in addition, some other things to consider would be anything that a student would have expected as income, or even unexpected expenses that may pop up once they arrive on campus that should be considered. Next slide. So in addition to managing some of their money for the very first time, a lot of international students also have to learn about cultural differences in banking practices. So for instance, in many other countries, it is definitely uncommon to have to do comparison shopping to get the lowest price. Some countries are solely cash-based or barter societies, but in the U.S. we use a lot of plastic cards, as you may well know, in addition to cash and paper checks even. So tips and other acceptable forms of monetary gifts are something that a lot of domestic students typically don't understand, so it makes sense that international students wouldn't understand them. And as far as the unexpected U.S. expenses go, last year we asked a lot of students what were some items that they didn't expect to have to pay for once they arrived on campus or in the U.S. in general. And it was definitely an eye-opener for our office when we realized that things like electricity and insurance and water and internet and healthcare were mentioned. Students were also surprised by the fact that tax is often not included in the listed price of items in stores. And when and who to tip can be confusing for a lot of people just with the various types of restaurant establishments in the U.S., let alone when you consider taxes or other travel things like hotel bellman. Many students also indicated that water, internet, healthcare, electricity, and cell phone use were either free or at a much lower cost in their home countries. So these are all items to consider when thinking about the context that an international student is living in financially. And I'm now going to hand it over to Mary Beth from Peer Transfer.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Unsworth, and I'm an account manager at Peer Transfer. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Peer Transfer first. So it was founded by an international student named Iker Marcade, and he was wiring about $50,000 to MIT Sloan School, and for about 6 weeks, no one knew where it was. He was, of course, panicked and looking everywhere, and he's coming over to the United States, didn't know where it was. Obviously, that's a problem. It was found after about 6 weeks, but during that whole process, Iker also saw that this was costing him thousands of dollars to make this wire. So, and unlike most of us who would just complain about it, he decided to start a business. So that's why he started Peer Transfer. And Peer Transfer was created to address the problems faced by international students. We offer a secure, seamless, and easy navigation system for students that not only enables them to pay in their home currency, but it also saves them a significant amount of money, especially compared to traditional banks. We offer excellent exchange rates and peace of mind for that international payer. And we now have offices in Boston, Massachusetts, London, England, and Valencia, Spain. And we're the leader in the U.S. with almost 300 colleges, universities, boarding schools, and partners. Next slide, please. So just like John and Andrea and everyone else is saying, there are problems facing international students. One of them is the time differences and the language barriers. So a student that is in China does not have the same banking hours as we do. And sometimes parents or other family members are the ones paying, and they don't speak English. Another problem is missing funds and the inability to track payments. So like Iker, he had no way to know where his funds were along the way. It's so scary to send that much money across the country and just literally hope and wait it arrives and gets there on time. And then the last thing, exchange rates and fees that drive up the cost. So exchange rates can add an extra 3 to 6% to a transaction. That's hundreds or could even be thousands of dollars more. And if you're a school, you've probably seen these short payments, which John was talking about earlier. And it could just be $5 or up to $50 short. And then I know it's not a lot of money, but it's annoying to the school and it's annoying to the student because they have to make another wire. And so these traditional wires, they travel through many banks before they get to you, and each one is shipping out a few dollars at a time. All right, next slide. So let's just look at a traditional bank wire just briefly here. So this one is an example of $20,000. And as you can see, a student can lose up to $600 or between $600 and $1,200 from that foreign exchange. We put an average of $30 there for those intermediary banking fees, and that could lead to an extra $1,230 for the student to be paying. Next slide, please. So how much is it costing these international students? We like to put it in perspective for everyone. So there are over 700,000 international students attending the U.S. colleges every year, and that is about $1 billion in exchange rates and fees. So if you're a techie, that's a lot of iPads, a lot of MacBooks, and a lot of iPhones. Next slide. So the peer transfer solution. We offer convenience. So this is the biggest one. Students can pay in their home currency, and they can track their payment throughout the whole process. It's easy from start to finish. Savings, we eliminate hidden bank fees, so there are no more short payments. They also save on that exchange rate, as we offer wholesale exchange rates to the students. Then there's security. So we have received seals of approval from Trustee, McAfee, VeriSign, and we encrypt all information. So you can rest assured all the payer's information is safe. And then the peace of mind. Our quick and reliable delivery of funds, it's always in the correct amount. And our 24/7 multilingual customer support handles all time zones and any potential language barrier. Of course, there's no IT implementation. It's just web-based. So it's very, very easy for the school and for the student. Next slide, please. And this is a great slide just to show you that we collect payments from all around the world. As you can see here, we've processed payments from over 170 countries. So when our customer service says they've seen it all, they've really seen it all. Next slide. So speaking of our customer support, our support is one of our best features. Like I mentioned before, it is 24/7. We are multilingual, so we can help support students, parents, anyone that's paying, and we can be reached by phone, by email, Skype, or live chat. And that live chat is actually one of our best ones. You know, students that have a little hesitation with their language barrier, they can type and go as fast as they can, but they're talking to a live person right there. So it's a great resource. Next slide, please. So we protect our payers by offering a few added benefits. We lock that rate for them for at least 4 days, and we'll keep that transaction open longer if the payer needs more time. So some banks and some countries, we know they just take longer than others. So as long as they're in communication with us and they're working on it, we'll keep that open for them, usually after 12 days, sometimes even longer. If we don't hear from them after that 12 days and, you know, they put it through and we haven't heard anything after we reach out, of course we'll cancel it because, you know, we don't want to lose money on that hedge. But so we really do lock that in for them for a while. And now we have this great new feature, and it's called the Best Rate Guarantee. So we always do our best trying to offer the best rate out there. Sometimes the payer will compare mid-market rates to the rates that we provide. This can be seen on sites like Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg. However, once they go to their banks, those rates don't include that additional 3 to 6%. So usually we are really offering that best rate. However, if by chance we are not, and it can happen because some countries, they fluctuate, you know, in case they're not offering it, we implemented the Best Rate Guarantee. Basically, if the student can get a better exchange rate at his or her bank within 2 hours of booking through peer transfer, they just need to provide us proof of the quote, and we'll match it. And actually, we'll give them a $25 gift card. So we're always trying to ensure that the students are saving money. Next slide, please. So let me show you the process. It's very simple, like I mentioned before. They go to the ERS payment page, and they click on that peer transfer icon right there, and that links over to peer transfer. And then they just start filling out some information. So they fill out the amount and the country they're from, a few pieces of information that we're looking for, so like the account number and a first name, last name. And these are all things that will help everyone track the payment all the way through. So that's why it won't get lost. Next slide, please. Once they submit that, we will provide our bank transfer instructions. So no longer do the schools or anyone else have to provide their banking information. We provide that to the students. They take that and they can either go online to their bank. Sometimes they can call their bank. If they go in person, they can print it out. They use these instructions. They send it over to peer transfer, and we then send it over to ERS. And as you can see on the top there, they can track it along the way. So once it goes to their bank and then to peer transfer and then ERS, it'll light up along the way so they can kind of see where it is. All right, next slide. So once again, we'll just go over the process overview. So the payer goes to peer transfer through the ERS site and books it online. They then send the funds to peer transfer via their bank, typically in their home currency. We receive the funds, and then we will do the exchange rate and process that into U.S. dollars and send it over to our ERS. We also run every payment through compliance. So we make sure that the money the ERS is getting is good money. They never have to worry about laundering or anything like that. And then communication is sent to ERS and to the payers throughout the whole process. So they know when the payment is received, and when ERS receives the payment, everything is documented along the way. And the next slide, please. So just to wrap up, you can see the testimonials here. Peer transfer, we are always pushing for that cost savings, that enhanced customer support, and that peace of mind. And we are constantly delivering that over and over again to each student and each school. And now I'd like to hand it over to Tom.
Yeah, Mary Beth, thank you. We do have a couple questions that came in. So one question was for Andrea. One question was for Andrea. One question is for you, Mary Beth. I'll start with your question first.
Sure.
The question is, our school uses Peer Transfer. Where can I go to learn more about Peer Transfer's third-party billing portal and setup?
Oh, yeah, great. You can either contact our support team or account management, and it's very easy. It's just account management at peertransfer.com.
Okay, great. Andrea, are you with us?
Yep.
Okay, here's your question. What role does your recruitment team play in ensuring students are made aware of how to navigate our financial system? More so, are they being made aware of these differences before agreeing to come to the university?
That is a good question. Since we're on all 3 campuses, we don't work with the recruitment team for each campus. We do, however, work with the International Student Services offices, and they have a lot of resources available to students, and we also do a lot with orientation. But some students just don't get it by reading. Sometimes they actually have to be in the culture to have things click. And some of them just rely so heavily on their parents, and their parents may not provide them the right information, or there's some type of linguistics barrier for them to understand before arriving on campus.
Thank you, Andrea. One more question for you, Mary Beth. And this is from a banner school, can Peer Transfer send the money directly to the school?
Yes, so we can set up, for tuition payments, and like John had mentioned before, we have portals for all sorts of different payments to the school. Collections would obviously go through ERS, and then if you have tuition payments or anything else, we set it up and it goes directly to the school. So same process.
Okay, great. Well, with that being said, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Tom Tornatore.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tom Tornatore. I work for Enterprise Recovery Systems. I handle the majority of the international students, foreign students, and that grew out of the fact that I am a remote collector and can make phone calls at odd hours when our main office would not normally be open. So from a collection agency standpoint, we have a little different spin, but I'll try not to duplicate a lot of the information that the other panelists gave you earlier. For our purposes, a international student is not necessarily just somebody who came from overseas to attend school here. We also have to try to reach out to students who were born in the States, went to school here, and then either went overseas to live or to continue their education. And we have U.S. students who live in different time zones, such as Saipan, Federated States of Micronesia, Guam, and they will require telephone contact at hours, again, other than our regular office hours. Next slide, please. How these collections differ from our domestic collections are generally the students, when we receive the files from our clients, they will probably not have a Social Security number in there, which is a big part of how a collection agency would begin skip tracing efforts for a student, either through LexisNexis or credit reports and your standard skip tracing efforts. They are really not effective with a foreign student. The local address that the school sometimes sends us, if there is a local address, was an apartment or a dormitory address, and again, not much help for us once the student has left the States. Any family references would usually be overseas as well. Sometimes we'll have an exchange student who is staying with a host family, and we won't necessarily be able to skip trace back to that host family because our skip tracing information comes from people that either have bank accounts or pay utility bills or rent, things like that here in the States. So again, that's a block to our standard skip tracing. One of the benefits sometimes is that a lot of the international students that we end up locating, we've located them because they've publicized their attendance at a U.S. school, either on a blog or their LinkedIn page, Facebook, and are very proud of that fact, even if they haven't finished paying for it. So we locate them that way. Next slide, please. If we do receive a foreign address, they're, again, generally not much help. Most of the collection software systems will not recognize a foreign address. Letters don't get sent. Standard validation notices really have no authority or any meaning outside of the United States and are generally returned to us. The address format, as you can see here, is different anyhow with the street name before the number, and it usually gets rejected by the systems. Next slide, please. International phone calls is one of the methods that we attempt first to get in touch with the students. A lot of times, however, because, again, our standard systems are a 10-digit system, some of the digits might be missing from the telephone number by the time it comes to collections. Country codes are often missing. There are differences in dialing cell phones versus a landline in a lot of countries. So you have to understand the differences, and you have to know what type of phone it is that you're calling. The time zone issues, obviously, in an attempt to get in touch with the student at their convenience or reaching a place of employment is something that we do consider. However, FDCPA does not really apply to a student outside of the United States, but ERS's policy is to try to stay within those guidelines so that we're not calling somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning their local time. Next slide, please. In addition to the phone calls, the issues with the phone calls, ERS incurs the cost of making some of these calls, and we have had phone bills at $7 and $8 a minute in trying to locate a student. International banking, Mary Beth went over this, and Andrea, actually everybody's kind of touched on it. One of the issues are the holidays are different from U.S. holidays. I had a payment this week, as a matter of fact, that was scheduled for a Monday, but in Mexico it was some sort of a banking holiday, so the payment couldn't be processed. Time zone on the has an impact on the international wire regulations. There's an email later on in this series here that is an example of somebody who did not think we could have received the wire yet based on the time zone difference. The exchange rate varies and can be dynamic from day to day in some areas. As an example, we have a student currently making payments from Kenya, and this was before we got into an agreement with Peer Transfer, and this student paid the same amount of $400 for 8 months, and each time that payment arrived at ERS through standard international wire transfer, the amount we received was different. There were none of the 8 payments were the same, so it becomes very difficult, especially with an account that needs to be closed out at the end. That account happens to be open with an $18 balance left on it, and it's going to cost the student, or it would have cost the student more to send that remaining $18 than it was just for us to close the account. Next slide, please. Language barriers, everybody's kind of touched on that. Generally, it's not an issue if we're speaking with the actual student. If they went to school stateside, then most of them are pretty fluent, unless they don't want to be. References and family members may not speak English, but I'm finding that a lot of the overseas corporation have an English-speaking person on staff if you call during normal hours. Voicemail on cell phones most of the time is a foreign language, so you're not sure if you've reached the person or if the phone is actually working. A lot of times you can't even tell what the message is. Next slide. Name issues have been touched on recently. Name shortened or changed in the U.S. There's a lot of students that use an Americanized first name, but their actual name was substantially different, and that makes it tough to track those students back. Some students have multiple middle names, family names, and when they get entered into collection software systems, it's difficult to tell which is the actual last name or middle name. And we have titles that are sometimes used, and we end up looking for somebody with the first name of Prince or Sultan, and that does not help us in locating a student. We did have, just as an analogy, had a student that we located for one of our clients that had a federal Perkins loan. We were able to make contact with the student, and the address that we gave that student, or that the student gave us to reach him at, was just simply the presidential palace and the country that he was living in without identifying anybody, and it turned out to be the nephew of a sitting president of a Middle Eastern country. So it's amazing who we can run into out there. There are some other considerations with the students that end up in collections. Transcripts are not released by our clients, by the schools, if there's an outstanding debt. Sometimes the employer won't pay as agreed because they don't have the transcripts, or that becomes sort of a catch-22 there. There are visa issues due to not being currently enrolled in school. There's an email further down in our presentation here. I had a student that actually had to leave the United States, or he would have been in violation, and couldn't register for school that would have allowed him to stay stateside. Next slide, please. That's the email from the student. I don't know if everybody had the whole thing. That's the student that had to be allowed to, or that could not be allowed to stay in the United States, had to leave, had to incur that cost until he could collect the funds to pay his collection account, and then travel back stateside. Next slide, please. Is there another slide? This is an actual email from a student that was making monthly payments on an account. and you see some of the confusion that we had before we contracted with Peer Transfer and the costs that were being incurred. This was a $500 payment that was being made monthly. We would only receive $475, and it's ERS's policy not to pass that fee on to students. At the time it was $12. Now it's been increased to $15. And for us, for a student that's making small monthly payments, that could be all of the fee that ERS would normally gather on a $50 or $60 payment, but we would still have to process it the same. So we were actually losing money in processing these small monthly payments. Next slide, please. Some of the things that our clients are starting to do that assist us is to obtain at least one local reference if possible. Sometimes the student will have family stateside. Obtain a personal or work email that helps us get in touch with them later on, and an email for a parent or a sibling. So we don't run into the skip tracing problems with trying to get in touch with the students. We have a couple of analogies or stories that have some relevance to this topic today. There's a student that I'm dealing with now who went to school in New York. When we received the account recently, there was a South African address, but the Social Security number was just a visa number. Upon further skip tracing, we located the student actually living in Texas, and by this time has obtained a Social Security number and was actually very successful in running an investment firm on his own, and owed one of our clients nearly $40,000. So they don't, the students don't always remain outside of the country. I have another student, again just this week, that located an email address for, he's in Africa. He told me that there was nothing that we could do because he was out of the country, and I agreed with him, and I explained to him that the responsibility would still be his. And I moved on to the next account, which was the same school, and this student had a local address, and when we reversed the address, the name of the previous student came up and was living with this person in California, actually, and we were able to call him on his California cell phone, and he was quite surprised that we would even go that far to continue to look for him. So there are different considerations from the collection standpoint, and I will turn this back to Steve Recchia.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. There actually was one more question. Actually, it came in earlier, so I think the question was answered. And the question was, does ERS do international collections on bad debt accounts and use Peer Transfer? So, yeah, Tom is the supervisor of our international collection team, and then, yeah, obviously, yes, we use Peer Transfer to facilitate payments overseas. We got one more question that came up. This is for you, Mary Beth. It's, the question is, how does Peer Transfer make money?
That is a great question. So earlier I talked about how traditional banks, they charge 3 to 6% on that exchange rate. We are charging around that 1% mark. So that's how we make our money, but it's still a significant savings for the student.
Okay, great. David and Denny, did you guys want to say anything?
Actually, we've got two questions here. One, I guess more for Mary Beth, but that question is, if you have an international campus, you're an American U.S. institution with an international campus, how can Peer Transfer work basically in reverse to get monies to the international campus in foreign currency?
Another great question. So recently we've expanded and we now have schools not only in the United States, but Canada, the UK, I believe France, and Australia. So we're currently doing, it's the exact same process. We have banks and partners set up all around the world to make those local exchanges or local currency for the students. So if they're in the United States, they'd send it to a bank here. We do the exchange and send it over. Vice versa, if they're in Spain, they'd send it to a local bank in their home currency, and we do exchange and send it over here. So we are doing it both ways.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And one other question. This is probably for you, for Tom, and I'll throw this just to all the panelists, actually. What countries are you finding right now the most difficulty either in getting monies to the United States or to collect from?
The biggest obstacles are coming out of Africa right now, and I believe maybe Mary Beth can expand on it. There's not only a problem with the foreign exchange, but there's a problem with the country allowing funds to leave Africa. There's been instances in the past where ERS has actually had to complete an affidavit swearing that the funds were going to be used for educational purposes and send that back to the students so they could present it to some official before the funds could actually be released. There's a lot more government intervention in Africa than we're finding in most of the other countries.
Yeah, I actually have to agree. But we've also implemented, so when I showed those bank instructions that we provide to the student, when they print that out, we are also including an authorization letter now. So that authorization letter, basically the same thing, swearing that it's going to educational purposes, and we have seen that has alleviated a lot of stress from those African students. We also have seen a lot of headaches with schools in Venezuela, obviously with KDV, but we do work with KDV, and it takes a little bit longer to get those funds out, not on our side, but just KDV just decides how long they want to take. It could be a couple days or a couple weeks, but we are getting funds from Venezuela.
Thank you. I have a question here for Andrea and John. How do you, when you work with your International Services Office, in terms of building that relationship, are they able to give you additional information? Let's say, are they compiling addresses that maybe you wouldn't normally get for billing purposes? Or are there other things that an International Services Office can do to help in terms of billing and collection?
John, do you want me to go first?
Yes, yeah, please.
Okay, so being part of the financial literacy arm of the billing department, our relationship with International Student Services Office is more awareness-based. So we ask that they promote any educational resources that we have available, or they chime in on the development of new educational programs as well as marketing anything. And obviously when we did research, we involved them in the process of sending out emails and doing any anecdotal provision of information that they had from working with students, as well as putting surveys in their newsletters. And we work with 3 different campuses, so each relationship is a little bit different. And we're going to also be doing some meetings with students on the UIC campus because they decided that an online survey wasn't best for their student population. So that's going to give us a little more anecdotal information as well. But I'm not sure if John probably has a different description of what his unit does with ISSS.
Yeah, we are experience is somewhat limited. We have reached out to ask for addresses. Our Intensive English Institute, one of my collectors who's participating in the webinar, just informed me, has assisted us in locating addresses, or more up-to-date addresses than what the students have kept in Banner. So what Intensive English is on this campus is graduate students who are admitted to the university on an assistantship have to pass English proficiency, and the Intensive English Institute gives them essentially a crash course in English that enables them to pass the English proficiency exam to be able to begin their graduate program and serve their assistantship. So that office has been helpful. Our international student services offices, as Andrea said, has been helpful. We haven't used them a lot yet, but I anticipate, especially with our Money Management Center's relationship with them, that we will deepen those relationships from our side as well.
Okay, thank you both. If there are any, Steve, do we have any other questions out there in the chat box?
Yeah, we do have a couple extra questions here. I'll read them off. This one is for Tom. Tom, how do you validate the death of the student while in a foreign country?
Unless we can find some sort of a newspaper article or some sort of a news event, it's very difficult to do. It's not reported in the same method as it is in the United States. I did get an email from a friend of a student who had access to the student's email account, supposedly, and this student was in the Middle East, and I got an email back saying that from the friend that the student had died in an explosion. At that point, there's really nothing that we could do to verify, but the school did close the account. It's not easy to do overseas.
Okay, Tom, one more question for you. Are there any websites that would give the format for the mailing address to the different countries and the same for the phone numbers?
Yes. The phone numbers, I use a website called Area Decoder. They actually are a reseller of international phone minutes, but on their website for free use is a section that you can use to get dialing instructions, country codes, current time in the foreign countries, and it's very helpful. The post office has information available on mailing overseas. Again, if you're going to, and ERS does when necessary, it would have to be a manual operation because most collection software won't allow the address to be input in a format that it would need to be in to have the mail electronically processed to be sent overseas. So we would manually address it and hand carry it to the post office and pay the extra fee. Again, there's quite a bit more expense involved doing that, so we try to avoid that. Again, email is the best.
Okay, thank you. There's one last question out here. The question is, has there been any cases where an international student debt was litigated outside of the U.S.? I know from our perspective we have pursued individuals overseas. It doesn't happen too frequently. We kind of start the process, initiate the process by reaching out to an attorney in that foreign country, kind of understanding the process, the litigation process, if it's feasible or not, before we would proceed with that. But again, it's very limited in the cases that we do that, and typically they tend to be the higher balance accounts.
Just one interesting point on that, Steve, is when we do have a student with a federal Perkins loan that is overseas, whether or not they are born in America or not, we are able to put a consolidation through the Department of Education for these students using their foreign address, so that it's not a situation where you need to write off the Perkins loan. The student is eligible to consolidate through direct loans.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank our presenters today. I thought they did a wonderful job. I felt it was very insightful and well done. I also want to thank Denny and David for helping us with the webinar. Just as a reminder, we'll have a copy of the webinar, and it'll be available probably within the next 24 hours on our website at www.ersinc.com. And finally, I want to thank everyone that participated. Really appreciate the questions, and I hope you take some time at the end here to answer a few quick questions about the webinar. And feel free to reach out to me at any point in time if you have ideas or suggestions for future webinars or ways that we can improve the webinars. So once again, thank everyone for attending. This concludes the webinar.